This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live.
Welcome to the Friday morning break with John Gibbs. This week my guest, Kirsty Ruthven. We discuss gender stereotyping. And is gender stereotyping still a problem in schools? How can schools confront it? And indeed, the issue of gender and why it is such a hot topic at the moment.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live. Tune in live at ttradio.org, or to join in the conversation, download the Podbean app and search Teachers Talk Radio. Follow the hashtag TTRadio. Tune in, talk it out with Teachers Talk Radio.
And we're back with my guest this week, Kirsty Ruthven, who works both as an experienced teacher and school leader and as someone who has devoted some time through the organisation Lifting Limits to examining and confronting and discussing the effect of gender stereotyping in schools. How did schools teach boys and girls differently? When I was at school, it was somewhat different. This was the 1960s and 70s. Sewing was encouraged for girls. Science was clearly encouraged for boys. Under the surface of that, of course, there were lots of probably subtle reminders of who was who. Boys did rugby and girls didn't. Boys played football and girls didn't. And before that, schools were organised into girls' entrances and boys' entrances. They dressed differently. They were told that they had different roles in life. But now, is gender stereotyping, is the observation that girls and boys are different and should think of themselves as different, still an issue? If it's an issue, does it involve the limiting of what girls are expected to do, can do, science, engineering, architecture, or limiting what boys can do, be caring, thoughtful, empathetic? How much today is gender still an issue which schools should be concerned with? And why has it suddenly become really quite political, both in the UK and in the USA? My guest this week, welcome, Kirsty Ruthven.
Yeah, thanks, John. Thank you so much for having me on the show today. Yeah, we do hear from educators, haven't we had progress, and we've got lots of other things to focus on. But what we found with our work is that teachers are in a really privileged position in that they can either challenge these gender stereotypes in their practice, or they can actually inadvertently perpetuate them as well. And we feel like there are so many things that the evidence and research shows us, outcomes in society that can be tracked back to very strong beliefs in gender stereotypes that begin in the early and the primary years.
From your own personal point of view, dealing with teaching younger children, what sort of things have you seen in school that would make you think, well, this is something we need to worry about?
Yeah, so at the moment, I'm lucky enough to still be able to teach for some of the week and work for the charity. So I teach in a reception class, and the topic "people who help us" is a very common one. I'm sure lots of listeners will be familiar with that. And it's amazing, even at the age of 3, 4, 5, the kind of preconceptions and the assumptions that children might have about careers, and not just careers, roles as well, about who might be looking after the children at home. And we know that kind of thinking starts so early on. And unless people in school or wider society can support children to see, no, actually, there are different possibilities, there are different options for you, then quite easily and quite quickly their choices and their ideas can be shut down at quite an early age. So So we see those kind of things in the early years, but as you move through primary school, it can then come out in the language that the children are using, and it may be things on the playground, for example, that you might think, oh, we need to challenge that. So really, it can be seen in a whole wide range of arenas, really, in school.
Yes, so school is only one of the places. We'll get on to in a minute, I guess, how important and whether it's possible even for schools to combat the kind of wider cultural values and messages that students are experiencing, young people are experiencing, and their families are experiencing. But I mean, I'm old enough to remember Janet and John, and Janet's in the kitchen helping mum, and John's outside looking at the cars. That sort of reading book has gone, and you wouldn't have that in school anymore. But when children are coming to school, when they're arriving at a very young age, are they already arriving with certain attitudes that they've derived from the way they maybe have been playing, or the way they've been, the messages they've received at home, even before this, even preschool?
Yes, I think so. I think that we are surrounded by this gender wallpaper, and I think as adults we've probably become so used to it, it just flies under the radar for us. But really, right from birth or even before birth, with things like gender reveal parties and even, I remember when I was pregnant and I said, oh, the baby's kicking, they'd say, oh, maybe you've got a little footballer in there, because they knew I was having a boy. So I think it's this drip, drip, drip from all different sources. The media obviously plays a part, and children's television shows. So yes, I do believe that children are joining school in the earliest years, having been exposed to this, and depending on their views as a family as well, it might be that has been challenged in their family homes, or it might have been exacerbated in their homes as well. So yeah, I think even if you step into major retailers, you can see the split, the divide between the boys' clothes and the girls' clothes, and the slogans that are on. We were really interested to see a teacher that we worked with sent us some photographs of a recent shopping trip where the t-shirts marketed towards girls said things like be kind, positive vibes only, and then the t-shirts that were marketed very much towards the boys were kind of apex predators and, yeah, what great white sharks and crocodiles and things like that. And it's interesting because once we've worked with teachers and we've done our training with teachers, they often say, "Oh, I can't not see it now. I can see the gendered wallpaper everywhere." So that does have hold an impression on children, even the very youngest children.
Yes, the boys are little monsters. That's commonly said. Oh, he's a monster, isn't he? and and I suppose the suggestion being that is expected, and that is actually all to be encouraged. I'm a father of daughters, and I can remember an early age. They're both through university now and grown up and things, but when they were little, we'd have you get that first sort of experiences where gathering of mums and friends, and the little boys, and I was very conscious of it. I think I was conscious that I wanted to observe that, how they would play and not discourage the girls, but the girls sat quietly and talked, and the boys had they were noticeably not so verbal in the way they. Well, one argument is that, of course, I'm heading towards the sort of nature nurture here and wiring of boys' brains, but boys mature later than girls, and one of their first experiences at school will be girls are more verbal than they are, and one of their first experiences at parental parties will be, and children's parties, that the girls are planning and playing and reading, and the boys are not yet there. Was this an observation that I was simply observing something I thought I would find? Or was there reality to the idea that little boys are wired differently?
It's a really, really important thing to delve into, and I don't think we do it enough as educators, as this nature nurture. We we really unpick this quite a lot in the training that we do. We have some really, really good discussions with teachers about this. And of course, there are undeniable differences between biological differences between girls and boys. But this idea of a pink brain and a blue brain, I don't know if you remember, there was a time in literature where it was really popular to have books like, men are from Mars and women are from Venus, and you had to talk to men in a different way that you would talk to women, just like you picked up there with the scenario of parties. And I think, again, when I come back to that gender wallpaper, what we know from research is that actually the most important thing about the brain is this neuroplasticity, and you get your wiring forms from what you practice, really. And we know as teachers that generally, hopefully, you get better at the things you practice. And there has been research around the amount of words that are used with infant boys versus infant girls. And we know that that caregivers will generally talk to infant girls more than infant boys. So that's how subconscious it could be sometimes. We know as well that caregivers and practitioners, early years practitioners, from a range of studies, generally expect more physicality from infant boys and young boys. So if you're a child growing up and you're being given permission to be boisterous, as it were, to climb, to run, then the likelihood is you will take that invitation. And then on the flip side of that, if you are a young child that is being spoken to more, is being encouraged to sit down maybe and do tabletop activities more, that may well, not always, but that may well be the invitation that you take. So yes, even I think the differences we see are so kind of hardwired into our psyche as adults that they almost become self-fulfilling prophecies. And you think, and as a young child, they're very, very good at thinking, well, okay, the adult I'm with likes it when I do this, or I get more praise when I do that. So it's very, very complex, but really interesting to look at work. For example, Dr. Gina Rippon, who's done a lot of work looking at the brains of men and women, boys and girls, and kind of blows some of the myths where all this neuroscience, she kind of blows it out the water a little bit by saying, actually, no, this historically has been disproven. So really interesting to uncover and to think about our role as educators within this nature nurture debate, particularly when it comes to gender.
And I guess there must be studies also comparing different cultures across countries as well, because there will be different attitudes that will either exacerbate or modify those behaviors, and behaviors will be seen to be feminine in some cultures and masculine in other cultures. I mean, famously, blue was a girl color in the 19th century or so, and in some parts of the world.
Yes, yeah. And I've got a picture of my grandfather in the early 1900s where it was quite popular in the portraiture of the time for the young boys to be dressed up very what we would consider effeminately now. So yes, gender moves with us, and our expectation, it moves with us across history and culture. There are examples more widely around the world where obviously it's perfectly acceptable for men to wear a skirt-like dress because it might be a very, very hot country and that's the easiest way to keep cool, or to have longer hair, for example. Yeah, so there's lots of examples, and it's interesting. But when I work with teachers and practitioners, and they obviously bring their own backgrounds to the conversation, and it's really interesting to hear people. Like I worked with a teacher who was brought up in Somalia, for example, and she said when she came to the UK, this pink and blue thing, she was just aghast. She said, well, in Somalia, you just wore clothes, like you just wore whatever was given to you and you just got on with it. She said this marketing of this is a boy's colour, this is a girl's colour. She said, I've never seen anything so ridiculous.
And sometimes the pink blue thing is, I think, sometimes used by parents to avoid the perception that it's somehow embarrassing if people get it wrong. So they come up and say, what a lovely little girl. No, actually, it's a boy, or something like that. And that would somehow, why we should be afraid of getting that wrong, I don't know. You know, as if what you've just said about my daughter, she looked like a boy, or what you said about my son, he looked like a girl. And from early on, that is an offence you don't wish to create. So smother them in pink, and there's no doubt.
Yes, that's very true. And I think when you look at babies and young babies, they all just look the same anyway. So of course this societal kind of politeness of I'm going to code my child for you just so that we don't have a bit of uncomfortableness. Yeah, it's very true. So.
You're listening to the Friday Morning Break with John Gibbs. My guest this week, Kirsty Ruthven, who works for Lifting Limits, raising awareness of gender stereotyping in schools. We're discussing gender in schools. Why is it an issue? Is it still an issue? And how do we confront it? And I remember showing students who were talking about masculinity. Well, this was in sixth formers, and it was in a cultural history class. And I put a picture up on the wall, 18th century, or it wasn't 18th century, 17th century young men, two dashing men about town, and they dressed in the height of masculinity of their time. But of course, it's all silk and lace and floppy curls around their heads and large bows on their shoes. Almost everything about them would have been seen as feminine, and yet that femininity was masculine then. So our attitudes, and of course, it's not surprising at all, I would guess, that children are extremely attuned to the desires, hopes, and affirmations of elders, parents particularly, but also teachers, anyone else. Because that's how you survive, isn't it? For thousands and thousands of years, the child picks up what's acceptable and what's wanted of them. So they must be brilliant at reading the little codes and nudges of acceptance.
Yes, very much so. And I think we think, think something like gender stereotyping, it would be something that needed to be looked at more in secondary schools. But actually, our work shows us that anything you do at secondary school is fantastic, really, really important work. But actually, what you're doing is unpicking what's already been formed, what we think's already been formed around Key Stage 2 in schools, but can actually start being formed right back in early years, even before children have joined school. So I think it's really important to think about how clever the human child can be at picking up all these things around them.
Absolutely. And one of the things that strikes me is that if you talk to younger children, girls are often quite affronted by the idea that they shouldn't be engine drivers and doctors and things when they're young. But aspirations seem to diminish. Well, this may be historically less true than it used to be, but as you enter secondary school, I remember a careers teacher coming into our class in 1970, whatever. So this is going back to antediluvian times, and asking the boys what they want to be when their hands. All the boys put their hands up. Various things were suggested. The girls didn't know what they wanted to be, but largely wanted to be happy in whatever it was they wanted to be doing. I don't think that's true now, but I would guess there is a problem with aspirations of girls. In other words, there is still a feeling that science and engineering isn't a thing for them.
Well, I think it's really hard to lay the blame at when I was a year 6 teacher, you always kind of felt the pressure of stats on your shoulders, where actually it's everything that's happened before year 6 that really is the marker to how successful a child's going to be. With with those particular assessments. But I think the same for secondary school. It's going to be an accumulation of education that leads to that point. And we do know that yes, women and other groups are still underrepresented in STEM careers. I know that the Institute of Physics has done some really excellent work around the stereotypes of science, and particularly the uptake of girls with physics A level. So, and I know that there's fantastic role models out there as well that are kind of shouting down the ladder and saying, hey, this is really, really great careers. This is something you should really think about. So I think we are getting better, but I think it's something that needs to start even earlier. There was a piece of research done called Redrawing the Balance, I think just before the pandemic, where they asked 5 to 7 year olds to draw people doing various careers, and it was a surgeon, a firefighter, a fighter, a kind of a pilot, and the vast majority drew men in those careers, and then they were actually visited by women who hold those roles, who do those professions. And even then, when they came dressed with all their regalia of whatever equipment or uniform that they needed to do those jobs, some of the children said, "Oh, they're just women dressed up. They're playing a role." And the visitors had to say, "No, I am actually a surgeon. Like this is my job." Yeah, I'm a real one. I'm not just dressed up. It's not a costume. So yeah, I think like I said, any work in secondary school is great, but it really does start with those subject choices, and then those subject choices, the seeds are sown much earlier than year 9 when you're choosing your GCSEs, or year 11 or 10 when you're thinking about apprenticeships or A levels or going into the world of work, whatever you want to do, colleges. So yeah, it's definitely not all on secondary school shoulders. I think we can all play a part in redrawing the balance.
And it is such a waste for society if talented, capable girls, and for that matter, well, I think there's a lot of waste in society for talented, capable boys who early on associate science and learning, intellectual pursuits generally, as things that aren't masculine. And of course, that's the other side of the coin, isn't it? That there has one of the features that I experienced in my teaching career was, I don't know when I first heard about the problem of underachievement in boys, but it must have been a good 20, 30 years ago. And boys' underachievement has become more and more manifest as working class boys, particularly white working class boys, particularly, have also themselves, in a sense, fallen into a stereotype that books and book learning isn't a boy thing.
Yes, yeah, that's a really good point. And I think I was just about to say, after talking about girls in STEM, that actually, these stereotypes are harmful for all. And a lot of our work is around masculinities as well, and how we want boys to look at different careers and think that could be for me. For example, teaching in primary or early years, or nursing, or who are we giving permission to be the carers in society, or to give care and show care. So I think it's about the balance, working on definitely, but both sides there. And yes, I think it's really interesting, any kind of stereotypes around. I mean, there's some great work around rethinking masculinities in school. Do all boys respond to competition? Well, yes, you're always going to find, just for the nature of probability, you're always going to find some boys that respond to competition. But what happens to the boys that don't respond to competition? Well, the likelihood is they just think, oh, I'm not even going to try. So it's things like, do we have to frame things always around football? Yes, there are a lot of boys that like football, there are a lot of girls that like football too. But I always, when I was taught in Key Stage 2, for example, I always felt quite sorry for the boys that weren't the football boys, because I felt like it was such a rite of passage, and it was such a dominant narrative with, on a Monday morning, your team did this, your team did that. And I could really see some boys that were just like, oh, what about me? I'm not so into that. So it's really important to look at the effects of stereotypes for all, and that particularly we don't have this deficit model of there is something wrong with boys. There might be something wrong with outcomes for girls and boys, but there's not actually anything wrong with them. There's something wrong with the structures that they are within that we need to challenge.
Yes, I can remember being at school and deciding, for reasons of wanting to fit in, that Leeds United football team were my team. And for no reason at all, I've lived in the south of England, and they just wore white. I remember their name, because when asked, who do you support, I would say Leeds United. It's because then it gave me a way of trying to, then I couldn't follow it up very much as to why I liked them, but nonetheless. But it was opening, and it was necessary to have a football team. So what you're saying there is don't adopt the idea that if you can say we can design a boys for school for boys. It could be lots of rough and ready stuff and competitions and dismantling cars and all sorts of things like that kind. That will alienate some boys.
Yes, and equally there'll be lots of girls who want that as well. I mean, it's basic stuff around you. We know that if you make your classroom more inclusive, for example, if you have movement breaks and you're not constantly doing chalk and talk, which I'm sure lots of people do not do anymore, but we know that an inclusive classroom benefits all children, not just the children that may have a diagnosis or additional needs. And it's the same around stereotypes. What works well, we'd be able to say works well for everyone. And I was very guilty. I mean, I used to work for a local authority and run CPD for teachers. And we used to do one on boys writing, and it was a sellout every time, because people were thinking, "Oh my gosh, like, how do we help these boys?" And I was guilty as anyone at saying, "Oh, print off some superhero paper, or buy some special pens for the boys, or get them to write about this, that, or the other." And I would not do that now. I would say, well, how can you make the writing curriculum exciting for everyone, not just this stereotypical boxed in idea of what I think all boys will respond to.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, a leading publisher of books, directories, educational guides and magazines specifically aimed at forward-thinking schools in the UK and beyond. Have you checked out their latest releases? Don't miss out! Visit johncattbookshop.com to explore their full range of titles and advance your own professional development today. Happy reading!
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and this is Teachers Talk Radio News.
In a week where Ofsted has found itself under increased pressure and scrutiny following the death of a primary school head teacher, The Independent has focused on the decision by many school leaders to remove references to Ofsted from websites. The removal of logos and other references from school letterheads, websites and other materials is being done in what many describe as solidarity with head teacher Ruth Perry. Other forms of protest against the inspectorate have included the wearing of black clothing and displaying photographs of Ms Perry in schools where inspections are taking place. Unions have also urged Ofsted to pause inspections, and the NEU handed in a petition to the Department for Education, which had 45,000 signatures, calling for an accountability system that was supportive, effective and fair. In a statement, Amanda Spielman, HMCI, said it would be against children's best interests to pause inspection, and that inspection was important for both schools and parents. It has been further revealed by the BBC that inspectors had visited Caversham Primary School, where Ms Perry was head teacher, in 2019 as part of a pilot of the latest inspection framework, and that Ms Spielman had also been present. In a newsletter written at the time, Ms Perry said she was proud of how well pupils and staff had responded to the experience and that feedback had been overwhelmingly positive. But a formal inspection in November 2022 rated Caversham Primary as inadequate as a result of failings in training, record keeping and checks on staff, although it did also state that children were provided with a good education and that the school was a welcoming and vibrant community. In a statement, Amanda Spielman said that the debate about reforming inspections to remove grades was legitimate, but any changes would need to meet the needs of parents and government. And a spokesman for the Prime Minister said, "We are confident the current rating system provides the right level of transparency for parents." In Manchester, students at the city's university who have been refusing to pay their rent in protest at high costs have been removed from a university building by bailiffs. The group of rent strikers had occupied the University of Manchester's Simon building, and videos on the BBC News website appeared to show some protesters being carried out. A spokesperson for the university said it regretted the action, but that the protest had been going on for a significant amount of time. Campaigners said the situation was disgraceful and shamed the university. Around 250 students cancelled payments in January and demanded a 30% reduction in rent, arguing they were struggling to buy food amid the cost of living crisis. A smaller group occupied the building, and it was this group who were removed by bailiffs, enforcing a court order after they had ignored multiple requests to leave. At the University of Birmingham, a recovery flat where students with different addictions can live together to help them complete their studies has been opened. The BBC reports on the programme, which is being pioneered by the university, and is trying to help students stay addiction-free. The Vale, a huge student village near the campus in Edgbaston, is home to thousands of undergraduates. In one of the large blocks of flats, 6 units have now been set aside for students in recovery. Supported by a peer manager, the flats are alcohol and drug-free, and currently are male only, although it is hoped another flat for 6 female students will open next year. The hope is that students can enjoy university life without missing out on support. The programme is supporting the Better Than Well project, which currently supports around 50 students, and was set up to help students with addictions to be successful at university and with their recovery. On South Townside, a primary school in Jarrow kick-started their Kindness Matters Week as it became the first Kindness Matters school in the area. Pupils at St Joseph's Catholic Primary School and its staff were asked, "What does kindness mean to you?" And, in the run-up to the main event, completed a 30-day Kindness Matters challenge. Kindness Matters was set up in 2012 by John McGee, known as the Kindness Coach, and it teaches kindness and well-being to school children and teachers. McGee visited the school as part of the week, where he led a super learning day focusing on what the pupils had done so far and what they would do next to help the world be more kind. This has been your Teachers Talk Radio News with Joe Fox.
This is 2 Minute Tech with Steve Woods, your tech briefing on Teachers Talk Radio.
Hello, this week I've got to episode 60. What better to celebrate 60 episodes but look at what potentially happens every 60 seconds online and do it in 60 seconds. To do this, I've used the term infographic in my search. Infographics are a great way to show visually a lot of data. They're not just for IT concepts, and I'd recommend seeing if you can find any that represent your subject. The most recent infographic I found was in a blog by Stephanie Heitman called What Happens in an Internet Minute. Feel free to look her up and read her research. Right, here we go. Start the countdown. In an internet minute, 174,000 apps are downloaded, 16.2 million texts are sent, 231 million emails are sent, 694 million songs are streamed, 6 million people buy something online, 5.9 million Google searches are made, 44 million people view Facebook live streams, 20.8 thousand active users are on LinkedIn, 2.1 million people are active on Facebook. 575,000 tweets are sent. 46,000 searches are done on Pinterest. 66,000 photos and videos are shared on Instagram. 2 million Snapchats are sent. 167 million videos are watched on TikTok. 452,000 hours of content are streamed on Netflix. 3.67 million YouTube videos are watched. And that's just the headlines of an internet minute. That's a lot of data flying around on the biggest network of networks there is, the internet. As always, if you have a question on tech, why not send it to @TT Radio Official. I'm Steve Woods, and that was 2 Minute Tech.
2 Minute Tech with Steve Woods, your tech briefing on Teachers Talk Radio.
You're listening to the Friday Morning Break with John Gibbs. My guest this week, Kirsty Ruthven, who works for Lifting Limits, raising awareness of gender stereotyping in schools. We're discussing gender in schools. Why is it an issue? Is it still an issue? And how do we confront it? Yeah, and the overwhelming kind of evidence that students are that the single most significant sort of criteria for success in schools is your family background and family income. You can simply draw a cross relationship piece of statistics about that, a graph of some kind, and show the relationship between poverty and low incomes and low aspiration, and that's regardless of your gender as well. And it's going to be very difficult to break it. I remember I used to run a debate club, and of course I was at a large comprehensive school. The sixth formers, we'd have the most confident students who would stand up there and give their all. But as soon as we came against private school kids, they made mincemeat of them. And they just had a sort of cultural acceptance. It wasn't just the acceptance that they'd been given advantages of smaller classrooms or smarter uniforms or whatever. They actually had an idea that they were good because they weren't at the school we were at. There was a way in which our comprehensiveness defined their lack of their exclusivity. Well, and that brings me on to thinking about how can you, in a world where much education will take place in the home, on the internet, through a great diversity of information tidal wave, what can a school do if gender relationships are constructed out there in a world that we have little control over?
Yes, and I think that point of intersectionality is so important. You can't just say there's this binary group of boys, group of girls. There's so much more that crisscrosses, like you say, your identity, and it's kind of your also the relationship or the thoughts that your caregivers have about education, whether they value education or not, is huge. It doesn't matter what background you come from, but if your parents value education, then that could work marvels for you, like you say, ethnicity or certain geographical areas, and it's all entangled like this big muddled ball of string. But that's what makes us who we are. It would be very boring if all boys did like the same things and all girls also like the same things. So I suppose our role as teachers is it really comes down to the importance of relationships and knowing your school community really, really well, and understanding children as individuals, and trying as much as possible, even though we know it can be unconsciously done, to avoid these sweeping statements of, this will work for this group or that will work for that group. We want schools to be this haven, as it were, of balance, really, and an arena where different possibilities are modelled to children and lived out with children. Because yes, you're right, it is this tsunami, this tidal wave coming at them from so many different things probably than we had when we were both growing up, with the social media you mentioned, and that's really, really tied up with gender stereotypes as well. So there's an awful lot schools can do, and I think I wouldn't want teachers to feel like, oh my gosh, this is overwhelming, it's too much, because there are really small things that that you can do almost instantly that will make a difference. There are bigger things as well and medium-sized things, but there are small things. So we work with schools to do an audit. So we look at the whole school. We look at everything from, obviously the curriculum is very important, but play times. We look at routines in the school as well. You know, are we lining up in boys' lines and girls' lines? The language we use, do we use gendered language in the classroom? Do we have kind of pet names for boys and pet names for girls? That's something that could be changed straight away. So uh, there's lots of things we could do, and involving parents and carers and governors as well. I mean, really simple things. One thing I spoke to a school about a few weeks ago, we trained the whole school staff, and luckily the office staff were able to come as well, which was really, really great to have them included in the training. And one of the people in the office was really alive to these debates and very kind of passionate. She said, "Do you know what I'm going to go and do? I've realised our emergency contact form, it says, first of all, it says mother and father." And she said, "I always thought that's not inclusive language, because we do have families where we have same-sex parents." And she said, "Oh, also it's always the mother's contact details first." So she said, if a child's sick or a teacher needs to get hold of them quickly, we always tend to phone the mother first. Whereas she said, what we should do is say, who would they like us to contact first? Because it could well be that the dad works at home and has got more flexibility, or the mum might work in a hospital, for example. So she went away really, really driven to then change the form, because she said it is little things like this that kind of add up to a bigger jigsaw puzzle, as it were. So
Yes, it is really quite subtle. The message that comes from that is that mothers are the ones who'll dab the cut and kiss it better, and men are just too busy because they're at work. Because that isn't even the structure of our economy these days. That's not the way it works at all. When most mums and dads are going to be working long hours as much as each other. But yes, that's interesting. That subtle message that men will be just too busy at their manly things.
yeah, busy with the manly things. And I've been guilty of that. And I think the whole process of this, any work that you're doing around equalities, whether it's gender equality or anti-racism, anything like that, it's really important, and it's really important to reflect, but also it's not about beating yourself up about it. Because I mean, I can remember times where I've given a letter to a child and said, "Oh, give that to mummy." I've instinctively said, "Oh, mummy will deal with it." And I think it just takes, you just need to step back and have the space to reflect and think, actually, no, I don't like that message it's giving. We need to change this. We need to take some action here. And this is what we're going to do.
And do you encounter people who say, "Well, look, I see nothing wrong with father. The assumption that father is head of the household, that's what is the case. It's what in our community, in my tradition. And if you undermine these stereotypes are there for a purpose. The purpose is to assert a boy's understanding of himself and a girl's understanding of themselves. And this you're confronting values we hold dear." I mean, that. No, I was just going to add. This came up in a discussion I had recently about the Trojan horse affair in Birmingham, and the schools apparently being infiltrated with certain groups. But one of the things that came across was that there are within society deeply conservative communities who would, and of course, it's a very, very hot issue in the United States right now, where there are now laws in a number of states, I think it's about 12 states or so, that cannot teach issues related to gender in any sense other than gender roles are fairly ordained by God and laid down by tradition. So I wonder if do you encounter that sort of resistance?
Yeah, it's a very it's a very timely discussion and debate, a really important one. And we haven't encountered it directly from families, but we have had educators say to us, we're a bit uneasy about this. We're worried about pushback from our families. But one way we've always been able to counteract it, as it were, is to link this work and any kind of work like it to the school values. So all the schools that we work with will have kind of mission statements and aims and values, and they thread through the whole school community. And I know that teachers have had conversations with families and said, yeah, it's not for us to tell you how your family is structured or how you bring your children up at home, unless obviously it falls into kind of a safeguarding concern. That's not for us to say, but school is a place where we show children possibilities. So we show children that their own lives are reflected back, but we also show them through windows kind of that there's other possibilities as well. And I think and I think 99% of the time it's always been a really positive outcome. And I think as well, gender itself is a very loaded, controversial word at the moment. And I think any kind of difficulties that we've had from school communities has just been down to misunderstanding about the work we do. So our work is about challenging gender stereotypes and supporting educators and children with a range of ways to address that. So I think once families understand that that's what we're doing, and we're very transparent with our resources and what we're coming in to work with children, then that's usually absolutely fine. But yeah, we're always kind of prepared for those debates and conversations, and I think linking it to expectations of British values and the national curriculum and school values, and saying, look, we are a school community that values equality and diversity. And for us to value your family structure and your beliefs, you then in turn have to respect the beliefs of others. And we're not saying to children, it's like I always say when I used to teach, world religions in RE, for example, as a teacher, you don't sit there and say, you have to believe this. You say, oh, some people believe this, or some people believe in one God, some people believe in many gods, some people don't believe in God at all. But you are painting a picture there of diversity and of the society that children will be growing up in.
Yes, it's about education. You're describing, aren't you, that what schools should do is teach people about the opportunities and the diversity and forms of human society and different values, so that they can navigate their way through them. And that would seem to be just what schools should do. But of course, if I think there was the story of the Channel Islands school where they invited into the school a drag queen, and the drag queen is going to talk about what they do. And of course, this was presented in the tabloid press as a scandalous affront to children who were being told that there were no such things as boys and girls anymore, or something like that. It was presented that way, and as you say, it's a very hot issue. Effectively, gender as an issue has brought down not brought down, but led to an upheaval in Scottish politics. No, carry on.
Yes, and I think it's, sorry to interrupt, and I think it's so harmful, because it's so important that we have these debates and discussions. But what happens now, because we're so afraid of the polarization in the media and of getting, this cancel culture, it's like it feels like you can't even say, look, I don't really understand your viewpoint, could you explain it to me? It seems like immediately, arguments are shut down, and it's really hard for people of opposing views or different views to share that. I mean, the case of drag queens reading stories in in schools, for example, it's such a shame that the media have kind of twisted that. I think of all the history of pantomimes and the dame in pantomimes, and that seems to be really ingrained into British. You know, I remember when I had some relatives came over from New Zealand, and we took them to a pantomime. And they were just like, what on earth is this? This is like the most bonkers thing we've ever seen. And we're like, no, don't you have pantomime? Like, this is like really British. And they're like, who is that? Is that a man dressed up as a woman? What is going on? And, you know, there's things like that you just think, that, you know, you don't see the Daily Mail or whoever picking up on that. So it's a real shame, because I think we really need to have these debates in a healthy way, and we have to model to children that actually you don't always agree with someone. That is okay. You can still live in harmony, and there are ways to, like you mentioned, teaching children how to debate, and the structures and the kind of routines around that as well. There are ways that we can think critically and explain our point articulately, that we don't have to cancel each other and say, you know, block them on social media and say we're never speaking to them again, because that's just incredibly unhelpful.
Yes, and some of it's somewhat self-reinforcing. If you're afraid that your son will go to school and be bullied if he doesn't fit in, then you'll advise him on how to fit in with certain ideas about masculinity, that which then become, well, a lesson. But your objective is that he shouldn't be bullied. He shouldn't fit in. They should fit in, rather. One of the things that on your website, Lifting Limits, is I guess it is shocking, and it's something that my daughters could absolutely affirm when they went to a secondary school, is that sexual harassment of girls at school has become almost normalised. As when I asked them, "Do you experience things like this kind?" They went, "Yeah, of course, yes." That's how we were talked to. That's how boys referred to us. That's how we were observed by boys.
Yeah, it is really shocking. And when you read those figures, like the NEU piece of research, when they spoke to secondary school teachers, and secondary school teachers, well, a third of them, I think, said, "Oh yeah, I see it every week." It's just, like you say, it is normalised, and it's that age-old kind of, you know, what you don't challenge, you silently endorse. So, and I appreciate, you know, I know how busy primary schools are. I've been a teacher for over 20 years now, and I can't even begin to think about how busy kind of the corridors are at secondary schools and things. But it's I know it's about picking your battles, but it really, really does have to change, because there are generations of girls growing up thinking, well, you know, what's the point of saying anything, because no one's going to do anything about it. And I mean, everyone's invited, where people were able to log their experiences anonymously online, was a complete eye-opener, I think, for many schools, when they realised, oh gosh, this isn't something that just happens somewhere else. This is happening right here. And I know there's some good things moving forward. Like I live in London, and it's really commonplace now on the tube to see lots of posters about sexual harassment on public transport, and actually some really good things about what is sexual harassment. So there was one poster I saw the other day, and it was like staring at someone for, you know, a long, you know, an uncomfortable period of time is harassment. I mean, most people that catch the tube know you just kind of look at your feet, and I thought that's really good, because it's spelling out. I mean, I know a poster is a poster. It's not actually physically going to stop someone from experience harassment, but
over time things change, aren't they? I mean, it's a dramatic, it's a revolution that's happened in only a few decades. Is that A young man can meet another young man off a train on Euston Station and kiss as they meet, and no one will blink an eye. Whereas that would have stopped, would have frightened the horses and stopped the traffic, and someone would have called a policeman not so long ago. There are change. I noticed them among the sixth formers that I taught. They were very, very accepting, incredibly accepting of gender flexibility differences and students who were gay or LGBT and so on. In the lower school, less so. It was altogether a more fierce environment still. But still, it's changing in a way that I could never have imagined when I was at school, where homophobia was almost painted into the wall, as you said earlier, the wallpaper of society at the time. So things do change.
Yes, so that's the positive notes. They really do, and I think the takeaway there is kind of we can change, and we as in individuals, but also as wider groups and wider society, because this most of this has come from social construction. So if you reject that, if you say, actually, I don't care if I see two men kissing at Euston, it doesn't bother me at all, good for them, then that is all part of making a positive change, and it all will add up to like you say, just bigger kind of acceptance and hopefully seeing it in wider spheres.
Well, we're nearly at the end, but I'm going to ask now about one last character that's popped up a lot on Teachers Talk Radio and among teachers who are concerned about how to deal with him, and that's, of course, Andrew Tate, someone I'd never heard of up until a month or two ago. But we're undoubtedly millions and millions of young men and women would have known his name as one of the most known influencers in the world.
Yeah, it's really, really important. And we know, I mean, we predominantly work in primary schools, like I mentioned, and we do have teachers saying to us that the children know about him. They may not have seen any of his content, but they know that his name holds power, whether they've picked that up from older siblings. So it is really worrying. And I know we've really honed in on him and his name and the kind of narrative he was pushing, but I think it's really important for us to think about the bigger question of why are young people, young boys in particular, listening to someone like him and thinking, well, he's saying some truths here, I could believe that. I think that is really important for us to consider, because it's obviously all very cleverly done. It starts off with kind of, look at my Lamborghini, look at my Bugatti. It kind of hooks people in, and then it's a gateway to much stronger beliefs. And there is some worrying bigger kind of global storylines. There was a big piece of research done by Ipsos, and I think it was in conjunction with King's College London, where they spoke to, I think, thousands and thousands of people globally. And there was some really positive stuff around people felt like gender equality what could be achieved in their lifetime. So that was great. But the really worrying thing that came out of that was that there was an upsurge in people believing that gender equality was at the meant to, so more gender equality meant worse things for men. Basically, it was like there's only finite amount of equality, and women are starting to use too much of it up, and that was coming across globally, which was really, really worrying. So I think, yes, it's important to look at the influences and why they are influencing, but I think there's a much bigger thing around that balance of and that narrative almost of, gender equality is good for everyone when you look at kind of mental health for men, and all those really worrying statistics that come out of places like the Samaritans, for example. it, yeah, and I think it's hard as well when there's economic downturn and people are struggling. Then of course they are looking at these aspirational people that have got so much money in the bank allegedly and driving these cars and things. It's really hard. But I think at the foundation, it's about teaching children to think critically, to understand that a lot of these things online are choreographed and edited, and they are not real, they're not reality. And to also get them to think about, how does it make you feel? What is the message that you're getting from viewing this? What do you think it wants you to make you do? And do you really believe in that? Is that the kind of world that you want to live in? So it's really complex, and I'm sure he will keep on, even though he's now incarcerated. I'm sure he will keep on coming into conversations. But it's not just about him. It's about how has he had such an influence, and what do we as educators really need to think about the root causes for that.
Well, this has been a fascinating discussion. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're really welcome. It's an absolute pleasure. Yeah, and get in touch again anytime. It was really lovely to have the time and space to talk through some of these bigger issues and questions. Thank you, John.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time on Teachers Talk Radio.